Okay, so I'm Robert Whittle. This is me comparing the cultural exchange that's existed between Italy and Greece. You might want to say, well, why Italy and Greece? Well, for one, they share a very, very large historical connection with one another. They've been connected for hundreds of years, and they've traded a lot of food, philosophy, and language, and that has fundamentally shaped how both countries look and are perceived at today. Starting with that history, Greek colonization of southern Italy took place about 8th to 5th century BCE. That's where most of these city-states, which is featured on this image in the left side, that's where most of that started. So essentially, the Greeks, composed of city-states like Sparta or Athens, they come in and they establish their own city-states here. And a lot of Greeks from Greece move over and they go into southern Italy. And that's important because that's the start of really all this cultural exchange that happens between Greece and Italy. Um, for example, here on this map are a bunch of different Greek dialects that began to come in. So you had stuff like Doric or Northwest Greek or Archaean, and that would come in and shape the language of southern Italy, which we'll talk more about later. But basically, this region, which was called the Magna Graecia, um, that is going to become very, very important when it comes to how these two cultures would sort of fuse. So the Greeks are there for a while, but eventually Italy falls under Roman rule in 89 BCE. And then even farther down, the Byzantine Empire takes over once the Western Roman Empire falls. However, what's important to note is that even through all this time, the Greek influence had never left. It was always there. And it remained there, specifically in southern Italy, where all those city-states were established. So Greek and Italian culture continued to fuse. Now, one of the ways they fused was the ideas that they sort of shared with each other, the like perspectives in a sense. Now, this was really prevalent during the Renaissance, which is about the 14th to 17th century, where you had a lot of Italian scholars and philosophers using Greek influence, or looking at Greek influence. For example, pictured here on the left, you have Manuel Chrysalis. He restored knowledge of classical Greek, the language and classical Greek literature, and that was important for revitalizing Greek ideas. And some of those Greek ideas were stuff like Platonism, which is based on Plato's philosophy, which that was revived in part by Georgios Gemistos Platon. If you're confused about why there's like slashes next to his birth and death date, it's because we don't exactly know when. We know around when he was born and died. We don't know the exact time though. And again, the significance of this is that Italian culture fused with Greek and Byzantine ideas. So there were a lot of these different cultures coming in and out of Italy. You had the Byzantines and the Romans, but it was the Greek philosophy that really ended up persevering through all of this, partly because it was there first and for so long. I mean, they were basically taking over southern Italy, the Greeks, for 3 centuries and then remained there for centuries more. So we have all this trade of ideas. And then as we step into the more modern history, even though obviously, um, Greece is now basically just a neighbor to Italy, there's still a lot of modern Greek influence going on in the form of the Greco people who live in southern Italy. And they specifically celebrate their heritage um, as being from Greek and being in cities that were established by Greek people. And we'll talk more about them later. But they really show how, cultural practices have also been passed down. They follow a lot of cultural Greek traditions. Now, one of the big things is languages, right? So I mentioned earlier how all those Greek dialects, they came in and they established, all these different types of speaking in southern Italy. Now, obviously, you probably know that Italians speak mostly Italian and Greeks speak mostly Greek. Um, Now, the Greek language has existed for a very long time, and it's not very influenced by, or it's not very much influenced by Italians or the Italian language. However, Italian is very influenced by Greek language, specifically the Greco language, which, and actually, Greek language has basically existed in Italy since, Greek conquest of southern Italy. And it wasn't always popular either, but that's another thing entirely. But again, even under the Byzantines, Greek remained the predominant language. So they were definitely sharing that language with one another. You could argue that's another tradition that the two shared with one another. And the way that tradition continues in the modern day is, you have the Greco language. Now, this was used mostly in southern Italy, which makes sense because that's where most of the Greeks were, and it blends Doric, Byzantine Greek, and Italian aspects. And you can find it in Italian villages like Centento, Puglia, and Calabria. Now, when Rome abolished the Greek Orthodox rites in 1545, Mass was sung in Greco, which that's kind of a significant event because, Mass, very religious event. But they were singing it in what was essentially a Greek-Italian fusion language. Now, modern Greco is a little bit more rare because um, in 1861, Italia had its Risorgimento, which is basically the unity of Italy, um, and Italian, traditional Italian, became the official language. But Greco was still taught to children, and it's still sometimes taught today, but it's considered an endangered language because it's really only spoken by that small subset of southern Italy. But the significance of this, again, is that the Greek language, which has a modern influence on Italian speaking, at least in some way, even if Greco is in danger. And you see the Greco alphabet to the right over there on that picture. But Greece, it, that exchange of language still has an influence. And then foods. Now, this is probably the thing that people know most about Italy and Greece. Um, so Italy, when it was conquered by Greece, again, a lot of this stuff stems back to that colonization. Um, they fused Greek and Italian foods. Now, initially, this was actually met with some pushback. There was a man, ironically known as Cato the Censor, who viewed the mix as impure. But eventually, it still became very popular. Greek wine became popular. Yeast, which the Greeks used, was introduced to Roman bread. Greek sauces and vegetables became popular. Meanwhile, in Greece, we think of that as the Mediterranean diet. A lot of that Mediterranean stuff, the ingredients, the food, was given to Greece by Italy. Um, they food focused more on presentation. They use Italian ingredients, pasta, rice, beef, lighter pastries. And probably the most important thing here is the way that Greece enjoyed their food changed. So previously in Greece, you would have thought of food as basically just sustenance, just something to give you energy and keep you alive. But then, you know, Italians didn't view food as that. They viewed it as something more, something to taste good, something that was more, I suppose, special in a sense. And the Greeks began to adapt or adopt that philosophy in their own um, eating. And that was something that previously only the wealthy did, but it became very popular here. So that's a tradition, um, a practice from Italy that became very popular in Greece. And they still share that food identity to this very day. And that is, again, part of that big cultural exchange. Why is that relevant today, or why is any of the things I just said relevant? Well, as I have been saying, food, culture, language, philosophy, all this stuff, it retains its influence from the Greeks. And in Greece, some of that influence comes from the Italians. The Greco people are a great example of this sort of exchange being alive and present in the modern day. Some of Greece and Italy's most popular foods stem from a combination of those two cultures. Even some of the stuff I haven't really touched on, like architecture. Literally, Italy and Greece, specifically Italy, wouldn't quite look like how it looks today if it wasn't for Greece. Without the two countries having that shared history, having that cultural exchange of product and preferences and practices, without any of that stuff, the two countries just wouldn't be the same. So it's really one of the biggest examples of how that cultural exchange can influence countries. And then these are my sources. Thank you for watching.